702 on 92.7 and 106 FM.
Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app
and on DSTV channel 856.
The Money Show is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking, a Pan-African bank that's invested in your story because your story matters. Good evening. My name is Nogukanya Mdambo. I'm with you between now and 8 p.m. unpacking how a number of stories affect you, especially when it comes to the market, your company news, and how you tie into all of that and why exactly it all matters. So please do stay tuned to 702 and Cape Talk between now and then. You may have heard just now in Balitetani's bulletins, ESKOM finally releasing its latest financial results 3 months late. But I suppose better late than never in this instance. Not the best of results. The power utility posting a loss of 55 billion rand, double what it was the previous year. The CEO, Dan Morakane, may still be upbeat, though, about the power utility's recovery in the coming years. What I'm going to do this evening is also give you the chance to ask him some tough questions when he joins us in a short bit. That's Dan Morakane, the ESKOM CEO. I want you... and I suppose here I'm going to abuse my powers, and excuse the pun, but I'm going to abuse my powers and allow you also the opportunity, when we've unpacked some of those financial results, give you the opportunity to pose some tough questions to him. If there's anything that you want to tell him, want to ask him, those comments, your burning questions, please send them my way and I will happily throw them to the CEO, maybe one or two of those. You're more than welcome to do that on 011 by calling us on 011 883 0702. You can also send us a WhatsApp on 072 702 1702. You can tweet us on X. It's Radio 702. I'm also on Kanya_Mdambo.
Walking this talk together.
Every hour.
Every day. This is 702.
Let's walk the talk.
Like I said, I've got Dan Morakane, who's the ESKOM Group CEO, joining us on the line now to unpack the financial results that the power utility released earlier this afternoon. Mr. Morakane, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Good evening, Kanya, and good evening to your listeners.
How are you today, sir?
Look, it's been a long year, and we had a very tight deadline to meet of today.
Yeah.
You recall that... we are actually releasing the results for the year ended March 2024.
Correct.
So this is 9 months later than the year end. And this is because in the process of doing our audit, we uncovered some discomforts with regards to our online vending system that produces prepaid tokens for electricity. And the auditors had to spend time to understand that, the implications on our revenue going forward, and any liabilities that may arise out of it. We, of course, we missed a number of deadlines.
Yes, that's exactly what I wanted to ask.
We said for ourselves in terms of complying with the JSE rules. As you may know, we have listed bonds, and so we really had the drop dead date of today to comply with that. Yeah.
Have you given these results to the JSE then?
Oh yeah, we have complied with the requirements and undertaking to the JSE. Let me just also put you into the right context. We released the results for year ended 2024 March, but we also gave the market an update in terms of our first half of the current financial year. This was important so that we can not only give the market old news, but that we have an opportunity to supplement the operational performance that we are experiencing from continued lights being on with the financial implications thereof. And so we provided essentially a set of data, financial data that covers the period of 18 months altogether.
All right. I said you posted a 55 billion rand loss, right, for that particular financial year that we're talking about. Was this a disappointing one in your opinion, or were we really already expecting this result?
Well, let's start off by actually understanding what characterized that year. That year of 2023 to 2024 will go down the history books as the year that we had the most intense and frequent load shedding.
Correct.
If you recall, that's when we were deep into stage 6 load shedding, stage 4, 5. We had a record expenditure in terms of OCGT, diesel spend of 34 billion rands. We had altogether 330 days of load shedding. And so from an operational perspective, our availability of the plants was only at about 54%. So operationally, we are always going to come out, not so good. But the fact that we had such staggering costs meant that our financials were going to look bad, which is for that reason that our operating profit was at minus 25 billion rands.
Yeah.
But I can also tell you that compared to the year prior to that, it represented some 10 billion rands or so improvement. What took the numbers to 55 billion, as we indicated, is the fact that as part of our unbundling process of separating ESKOM into a number of subsidiaries, we had to deal with an accounting treatment of assessed loss assets that we've been having. And that amount of 36 billion rands had to be put through our P&L directly. So it is the accounting treatment that chose or drove this number to 55. It cannot be recognized because of the rules that pertains to such, but it remains available for us to use as we proceed and become profitable.
Just out of curiosity, Dan, the drop in the sales volume for this period, I think it was a drop of about 3%, if I'm not mistaken, year on year. Did that have any impact as well in the overall picture?
Of course, the drop in sales will always have that kind of an impact, but you should put this within the context of it was the year of most intense and frequent load shedding.
Correct.
So, sales were always going to come under pressure, but in that period you also saw a rapid increase in the uptake of rooftop solar from customers. As we speak, and in the numbers that we subsequently showed for the first half of this year, we're seeing an improvement in terms of sales year on year of about 4%. We expect this to be the case as our ability to supply recovers. Yeah.
All right. I'll circle back to the outlook for next year in just a bit, but I also am curious to find out about where we stand with municipal debt. It's often been one of ESKOM's biggest issues. The municipalities, the non-paying municipalities, often always being a drag to the power utility and disrupting the financial stability of the power utility. Where does that debt stand now?
Look, we've always had municipal debt as an issue that concerns us from a business perspective. One of the things that compounded our concerns is the rapid acceleration of the debt. From the previous year to the year under review, or the year that we supplied the information for, we saw that number rising from just under 55 billion to 74 billion. As we speak to date, that number is sitting at around 92 billion. So it is concerning. You will be aware that the National Treasury has a Munich debt relief facility.
Program, yeah.
It is not succeeding. Only 4% of the municipalities that are joined to it are actually adhering to the conditions. So we have argued publicly that we need a new solution, and we need it yesterday. It is, it's something that you are seeing emerging within municipalities, the inability to pay for bulk services. The same happens to the water boards. And so we really have to get to a point where we get to understand what a sustainable model will be for municipalities to pay for services of a bulk nature that we provide.
How else can you be tougher on these municipalities in terms of making sure that they pay? If you're saying only 4% are compliant with, or at least jumped on board with that Treasury relief program, what's the other workaround so that we're not constantly year after year after year having to deal with this, the debt ballooning constantly, and we keep really, pointing the finger and trying to discipline them verbally, but there's no implementation further than that. What's the workaround?
Look, it's not only verbally that we try to enforce, our rights. You will be aware that we've taken a number of these municipalities to court. We have obtained court approvals to hold on to their bank accounts. In some instances, we have reached agreements with them under such pressure, where there's payment arrangements underway. So we can do as much as we can within the ambit of the law, but this is not sustainable. You cannot imagine a situation where we are actually in court with 20, 30 municipalities at any point in time. What this problem is pointing towards is the fact that the funding of municipalities on a holistic basis needs to be reviewed. This is something that ESKOM alone cannot do. This is a problem that is bigger than ESKOM. It involves the government, it involves other stakeholders like SALGA, it involves the residents themselves. We are hoping that we can get into a conversation as soon as possible in the new year. In some areas, we have done what we call active partnering, where municipalities have voluntarily asked us to come in and work with them in running their electricity department. What we do under such circumstances, we give them capacity to collect, but to also service the communities that are linked to them. We collect the revenues and we give them their portion of it. To what extent can we do this for all municipalities? This is something that is also on the table for us to consider. But we need a very creative way of solving this problem once and for all.
Yeah. Dan, you mentioned that these results that we're seeing now are a combination of a number of factors, including operational, financial, and so on. And I think the figure from Treasury when it comes to bailouts for ESKOM by 2025-2026, you would have received almost 500 billion rand in bailouts since 2008, since the 2008-2009 financial year. Are we seeing those bailouts achieving the intended purpose in terms of helping the power utility to get back on its feet?
If you followed our presentation, and I really encourage you to get a copy of it, there's a slide where we talk about the 4 pillars that underpins ESKOM's financial sustainability.
Yeah.
The tariff is one of those. A cost-reflective tariff
Correct.
is important. So is the need to resolve the issues around the high debt level. The third quadrant of that is the resolution of the municipality debt. And the fourth one is self-help in the form of internal cost compression. You need to attend to all these 4 levers. So the debt, the contribution from the state over the last few years, you are right, comes to just under 500 billion rand of 500 billion rand.
Yeah.
But when you do that without giving the utility a cost-reflective tariff, you are literally just undoing the impact of the balance sheet system that you are providing. So we argue that the country needs to have a conversation about all 4 components at the go. Otherwise, it becomes a vicious cycle.
All right.
What we have argued for in the last submission to NERSA is that we need a cost-reflective tariff and a resolution of the municipality debt so that the benefit of this 250 billion rands in debt reduction can be sustained going forward.
All right. Speak to me about those tariffs. You've, just like you've mentioned now, called for a sweeping overhaul of the price design, the electricity pricing design, saying that the current system is outdated and no longer fits the purpose in the challenging and the changing landscape. For the benefit of some of the customers that are listening now, the residents and the businesses, take me through ideally what that structure would then look like, how it benefits both ESKOM but also not crippling consumers in the process.
Look, I'm going to try to really make this generic and simple.
Please.
Think about it. The tariff structure in any normal service will look towards ensuring that the user pays for the cost associated with delivering that service through to them. In the case where we have people with rooftop solar at their households, and they rightfully argue that they use the power from the solar equipment only. Imagine they are not disconnected from our grid altogether.
Yeah.
And so the maintenance of the grid needs to be sustained. And so the pricing structure that is on the table at the moment has got some assumptions in terms of how those such costs will be socialized. What we are arguing is that we have to find a set of rules that is consistent with the reforms that we want to implement within the electricity sector. And this goes to even broader issues. The reforms and the pace is admirable, but we need to actually have a set of rules that now begin to talk to the environment that we are headed towards. It shouldn't be ESKOM, as a matter of fact, that's asking for unbundled tariffs and tariffs that reflect the services that customers are having. We should be having the regulator being ahead of the game and changing the rules to suit the environment that we are headed towards.
Yeah.
When we raise it, it looks as if, here we are protecting our monopolistic position. The fact of the matter is that those rules that are in place at the moment, were created in a particular environment, and they need to be adjusted for the benefit of all players, as a matter of fact.
On those issues that are before NERSA, you've also got the revenue application that's before NERSA. I know it's still undergoing a public process at the moment before NERSA will make a determination about whether or not it grants ESKOM that 3-year request. But I think you've faced a lot of flack over the 36.1% request for 2025. What's your response to that? Is it unreasonable? Is it unfair to even ask if it's unreasonable?
We should see that number in context. That number comes on the back of many years of tariff increases that were not cost reflective. Sure. I'll give you an example now. For the current period that ends March 2025, the implied return on assets, on regulated assets, that the regulator has provided to us is 1.7%. Our cost of borrowing is 11%. So we are already out of the money just from the service that we are providing. Yeah. Compare that to some number between 15 and 20% that is given to independent power producers. You can start seeing where the problem comes in. We've put before the regulator what we see from our books as being necessary for the sustainability of this business going forward. That's really what we put forward. We do understand that the country is going through difficulty, the economy is not doing very well, there's a lot of unemployment, and so we've also argued for the increase and positive upward review of the free basic electricity to protect the indigent and the poorest of the poor in our communities. That's what we put forward. But all said and done, this discussion should not be limited to the percentage increase. Okay. It should be inclusive of what measures needs to be in place to ensure a sustainable ESKOM going forward, given the role that it plays in the energy security of the country. That's what we need to. We don't need to do this only when there's a crisis of load shedding. We need to actually take a long-term view and agree on what principles we'll then use to look at the support for the utility. Yeah,
that's Dan Marukane, the CEO of ESKOM, just speaking to us about the financial results that the power utility posted today. 55 billion rand loss, but even so, the power utility is still upbeat about finally turning the tide. Maybe next year, perhaps we'll see as everything unfolds, but still defending that request by NERSA, a balanced approach, I suppose.
The Money Show.
The markets.
It's 25 minutes past 6. We're going to get the market commentary now from Rudy van der Merwe, who's the portfolio manager at AdviceWorks this evening. Rudy, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us.
Evening.
Rudy, take me through what is moving the market this evening.
Well, certainly we've had quite a dreadful day on the South African market. All the indices were in the red and typically in the region of sort of between 1.2 and 1.7%. So quite significantly negative, mainly following on the back of quite a poor day in the US yesterday. So part of that comes from the Fed signaling that interest rate cuts going forward will be lower than the market had anticipated. So they cut interest rates by 0.25%, which was much along the lines of what had been anticipated. But they're talking now of there being another potentially 25 basis point cuts in the works for 2025, and the market had expected that they'd be double that. So inflation is certainly becoming more sticky on the downside at the moment. In fact, since September, inflation has been increasing in the US. So there isn't as much scope to reduce rates just at the moment. And then the US clearly also has a issue with sovereign debt. So that's the other part of the coin. They're potentially facing a government shutdown. They need to get further spending approved in the US before they reach debt ceilings. And so potentially from Saturday, they could be in a government shutdown if they don't get that approved. There has been a bill put forward to approve additional spending, but it hasn't at this stage passed. If it was a simple bill that only allowed for the essential spending of government, I think it would pass in New York second. But people saw fit to attach a whole lot of hocus pocus to that bill. It's 1,500 odd pages. Nobody's had a chance to read it and evaluate it. And there's a lot of dreadful stuff in there. So I think the cost of passing it is actually worse than the cost of shutting down government, quite honestly. So at this stage, it looks like they might have a well, one doesn't know how short-lived it would be, but a potential government shutdown. And that obviously does raise uncertainty in markets. So that would have contributed to our market as well today. European markets are negative. Just at the moment, as we're speaking, though, the US markets are in positive territory. They're up in the region of 1% or so. There was some better economic data that came out there. Third quarter GDP numbers came in at 3.1%, which is better than quarter two, which was running at 3%. So at the moment, the economy seems to be reasonably robust, and the existing home sales numbers also were better than expected. They were up 4.8%. So those are helping short-term sentiment in the US, but I suspect that focus will shift again to government finances in the relative short term.
Yeah, Rudy, you said we're obviously in the red. How long do you think this shock to the markets is likely to last?
Sure, that's very difficult to say. It's going to depend on a whole host of factors that are sort of event risks rather than economic ones. The US economy at this stage is looking reasonable, but there's a lot of uncertainty around policy going forward and what the impacts of that policy could be. It certainly seems like inflation is in the process of rearing its head. So, there is a possibility that within the next year that the Fed could be back to raising rates if inflation continues along this track. And that is not something that's currently priced in by the markets. And those markets are quite frothy. So a lot of the valuations in the US, specifically in the technology space, are quite extensively stretched at the moment. So a lot of companies really don't look cheap and have priced in a tremendous amount of good news, which, and if that good news doesn't arrive, we could see those markets under pressure.
Yeah.
And Europe has similar issues. Europe has significant stagnation going on there. They have sovereign debt issues of their own. China has its own constraints on growth at the moment. They're trying to overcome those with stimulus, but their economy is under a lot of pressure, having spent enormous amounts of money on infrastructure and property over the last couple of years, which at this stage is weighing on them quite heavily, and they have demographic issues, massively, very quickly aging population, which isn't able to spend at the same rate that a very younger population would be. So that we do have challenges, but it looks like the relative short term comes with quite a lot of uncertainty, unfortunately.
All right. That's Rudy van der Merwe, who's the portfolio manager at AdviceWorks, just giving us a brief sense, I guess, on the impact of that decision by the US Fed. Expected was that 25 basis point cut. What wasn't expected, however, was that cut on expectations for 2025, cuts being from 4 now to 2. It's 31 minutes past 6. Let's get your news headlines with Mbali Tetani.
Because this journey is better taken together.
Let's walk the talk. 702.
Good evening again. My name is Nogokanya Mdambo. You're tuned into The Money Show here on 702 and Cape Talk. It's 18 minutes to 7 p.m. Join me now for a quick chat about compliance controversy as well as climate change. With me tonight to talk about how multinationals have been abusing South Africa's transfer pricing system to take significant profits offshore is Michael Hewson, who's the founder and director of Graphene Economics. Michael, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Michael, I don't know if you're able to hear me. Is Michael on the line with us? Not yet. But just while we wait to get Michael on the line, so I just mentioned briefly now that multinationals have been abusing South Africa's transfer pricing system, right? And they do that generally to take significant profits offshore. Now, the taxman SARS hasn't taken a liking to this and doesn't like the sound of it. So, of course, they've stepped in. And what they've done is that they have issued a warning, trying to find ways to tighten up taxation rules, on related party transactions. We're going to get Michael to speak to us about that and what this means for multinationals. Michael, good evening again. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening, Nugokanya, and good evening to the listeners.
So, Michael, for me at least in my head, transfer pricing can be a little complex to wrap my head around. Speak to me about the complexities first of transfer pricing.
Well, transfer pricing, it's essentially, it arises any time a company operates cross-border with another related party. And the question is always, what is the arm's length price for the goods or the services or the intellectual property that they are providing to the foreign related party? And why it gets so important, Nugukanya, is that each revenue authority in question wants to make sure that they are taxing the appropriate amount of profits of the respective entity. So you can imagine if one entity in the group is charging too much or too little, then that revenue authority would either be benefiting unduly or losing out unduly. And so it's really important that multinationals are, in fact, charging the various transactions at arm's length prices. And as I say, it affects all different categories of goods and services, intellectual property, and even financial transactions within multinational groups.
Tell me, Michael, okay, so I'm trying to wrap my head around it. So when it comes to transfer pricing, is it a generic principle that you can apply the same way all across the world, or is it different at the different multinationals in different parts of the world, rather?
Well, in essence, the question is, what price would an independent third party pay for that good or service?
Yeah.
Now, there are specific regulations in most countries, but the general principle is this concept of the arm's length principle. Now, there are some international guidance, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. They have a very comprehensive set of guidance that can be applied to these transactions. And then various countries, South Africa and other countries in Africa and elsewhere in the world, they have nuanced their own regulations to make sure that taxpayers are complying in a way that's required. But you're quite right. In general, the principle is the same across the world, which is what price would these related parties transact at if they were transacting with an independent third party.
Michael, what are the loopholes in South Africa? And SARS has intervened. Why?
So the question is always what is the arm's length price? And you can imagine sometimes it gets particularly difficult and challenging to determine that.
Yeah.
If I said to you, how much is a particular service worth? Well, you might be willing to pay more for a service because you need it more than someone else.
Yeah.
There's some products that you also might be willing to pay more for, maybe because you can afford them more or less. There's also, when you are transacting with entities in certain countries, there's various economic and commercial factors at play. So, for example, inflation rates, interest rates, there's other regulations. So in some countries that there might be additional levels of competition in a particular market. So you can't go in at the same price with goods or services because then you won't sell your product. So you reduce your price. Now, does that mean you're charging below arm's length price, or are you doing it for these commercial and economic reasons? There can also be business strategies. You might be a company or a management team that's saying, well, we want to enter into a new market, and we're willing to price our goods or services to that related party at a lower price because we've got a market penetration strategy. Now, one company might have a market penetration strategy, another company might not. So now you're sitting and you might be a revenue authority and you're comparing these two companies and you're saying, well, the one is charging a higher price and the other one's charging a lower price. Is that because the one is charging at non-arm's length prices, or do they have a legitimate business strategy that they're looking to apply? So you can imagine there's all of these factors that need to be taken into account in order to establish what an independent third party would do in a similar situation. Now, there are cases, Nugukanya, where companies have taken advantage of this. And, if there's a country, for example, that's got a lower tax rate, there have been cases in the past where companies have looked to put extra profits in those tax jurisdictions by either charging lower amounts into those countries or having those countries charge higher or inflated prices to other group companies. But, the interesting thing is many of the audits that we get involved in, it's not necessarily between countries with high tax rates and low tax rates. Yeah. For example, South Africa's corporate tax rate is about 27%. And many countries in Africa, the tax rates are often about 28% or 30%, etc. And yet, so it's relatively similar. And yet we see a lot of controversy between South African companies and other countries, because the question is, that the other countries are saying, well, are the South African entities charging too much for the services? And at the same time, SARS is saying, well, are the South African companies charging too little for the services? So sometimes it's just different perspectives and views, which does lead to this controversy.
Michael, briefly, just tell me how the introduction of the global minimum tax bill remedies this, if at all.
Well, it's interesting. So in the past, there definitely was some tax competition by certain countries that had low or no tax rates or corporate tax that they were levying. And that's incentivized some companies to set up operations in these low tax jurisdictions.
Yeah.
So the global minimum tax of 15%, which would be applicable to companies that have a consolidated group turnover of 750 million euros or above. So it's really big companies that this applies to. It basically means in every jurisdiction where they operate, they need to pay an effective tax rate of at least 15%. If they are paying less than that, then there will be a top-up tax in either that country or another country. So basically what it does is it disincentivizes companies from looking for low tax jurisdictions to try to earn and generate profits. Interestingly, though, from discussions with many companies, they are not expecting as a result of this to ultimately land up paying a lot more tax.
Yeah.
Most companies have said that the big challenge is there's just a big compliance burden, because now a lot more information is being required, a lot more data points are being required by these companies in order to show that they are complying with this new set of regulations.
All right. That is Michael Hewson, who's the founder and director of Graphene Economics, speaking to us about how transfer pricing and other related issues will absolutely remain a priority for revenue authorities like SARS across Africa.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa CIB, a Pan-African bank invested in your story and the potential it can unlock because your story matters. Absa is a registered FSP.
Good evening again. We have 8 minutes to go to 7 p.m. My name is Nogokanya Mdambu. You are still tuned into The Money Show. This is the time where we talk about some of the big stories that were on the markets, really trying to unpack how they impact you. So far, we've spoken to the ESKOM CEO, Dan Maragane, who gave us a brief rundown on ESKOM's results today. They did post a 55 billion rand loss, massive, but also him being quite upbeat about what the future holds for the power utility. In fact, I think what the power utility is saying, that they expect that by next year they may be able to start posting a profit. We leave that to, I don't know if they want to leave that to chance. I don't think so. I do think they have a strategy in place. There has been a business recovery, I suppose, business recovery plan that's been in place for ESKOM, trying to deal with the operational, financial, and sustainability issues, that have been receiving a lot of focus over the years. ESKOM still battling them. So we had Dan Maragane. We've also spoken very briefly about what's impacting the markets. No surprises. We've been speaking about it all day long. I mentioned it. I know yesterday I said we wouldn't be able to get down to the U.S. Fed announcing the interest rates because, of course, it happened a little after the show. It was about 9 p.m. yesterday. But in case you haven't gotten a sense of where we are with that, and I'm only doing it now just because, full circle, I guess, just for your benefit. The U.S. Fed announced a 25 basis point cut yesterday. That was no surprise because that's what I've been saying for the entire week, really, that there would be that 25 basis point cut. What was surprising, though, was the fact that the U.S. Fed then cut their expectations of further rate cuts for 2025. We moved from 4 rate cuts. They cut that in half. We're now expecting 2 rate cuts. And that hawkish tone that we heard from the U.S. Fed yesterday, I guess, created a bit of, I don't want to say anxieties, but some frustrations among investors. There was a bit of a sell-off on the Wall Street yesterday, the Dow Jones posting a 10th straight day, I think it was a 10th straight day of losses, bringing it to the most since 1974, if I'm not mistaken. That's about a 50-year low. So that was also interesting to see how the markets responded. The rand still not yet quite recovering from those losses, but we'll continue to track and we'll see where we go from there. We've also just spoken about transfer pricing, and I admitted that this is something that I sometimes struggle with getting and wrapping my head around. Transfer pricing and some of the multinationals taking advantage of South Africa. We spoke to Michael Hewson, who's the founder and director of Graphene Economics, taking us through what still needs to be done and why that conversation remains so important. The introduction of that global minimum tax bill was, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I just have to jog my memory, don't hold me to this date, but that was announced, if I'm not mistaken, last year by Finance Minister Enoch Kotongwana. Again, don't hold me to it if I'm incorrect. If I am, please feel free to just remind me who it was, but I think it was last year. And some of that, of course, is trying to deal with it. SARS has been quite tough on multinationals and trying to ensure that they stick to, that they're able really to generate income from corporate taxes. And I think that's what Michael Hewson was saying, that the global minimum tax bill will be able to get down to that. We also spoke throughout the week about the Time Group and what they were able to achieve since 2019. Phenomenal strides that they were able to make since 2019. They got an investment, quite a massive investment. I think it was at the start of the week, was it? Yeah, it was at the start of the week. And their valuation now topping $1 billion. And what that really means for Time Group is that they've become one of a few unicorn companies in Africa. It's quite massive. So what a unicorn company is a company with a valuation that's above $1 billion. So, and we spoke to some of the Time Group executives throughout the week. In fact, them just speaking to us about the importance of digital banking and what it means for the future of digital banking. What more can still be done in the South African market? They're not just big here in South Africa, but they've also managed to breach the market both in Africa as well as globally. There are plans in the works for Time Group to continue into Asia and to expand into Asia. And I imagine that investment, that they saw this week will, of course, contribute to that. We do still have plenty coming up on the show for you. And I hope that you will be able to take part in some of the conversations. There was a question, and I do apologize because I think we ran out of time, but there were a bit of questions about why ESKOM had not been, investing a bit more in other forms, in alternative energy. I do think that quite often ESKOM has emphasized, and I'm just looking at the WhatsApp, and that's why I'm circling back to this. ESKOM has emphasized over some time that they are trying to diversify their energy plan. They've spoken quite at length about that, and I think they do have that in the pipelines. There is no plan, I'll remind you again if you've forgotten, there's no plan really to let go of coal. Just ESKOM again diversifying their energy plan. What we do still have in store for you for the rest of the show, we're going to be speaking to Quincy Rabulapa, who is going to be speaking to us about her business, her agricultural business that's won her awards, speaking to her about sustainable growth, empowerment in South Africa's farming sector, what she envisions still needs to be done in that sector to make sure that South African farmers in that sector is able to contribute to the economy. You'll see quite often when the GDP stats are out, agriculture is always one of those really, really important sectors that we look out for that can either pump up the GDP numbers or bring them down. We'll also speak to a guest of mine who is going to be telling us, Bulelani Balabala, who's going to be speaking to us about wellness at work, mental health strategies, particularly for small business owners. So if you are a small business owner and curious to find out how you can take care of your mental health at this time of the year particularly, then you might want to stay tuned to that next hour of the show. If you want to get in touch with us, please do so. 011-883-0702 is the number to dial. If you want to find us on WhatsApp, 072-702-1702. That takes us to 7 o'clock. Let's get the latest in Eyewitness News.
702 on 92.7 and 106 FM.
Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app
And on DSTV channel 856.
The Money Show is brought to you by ABSA Corporate and Investment Banking, a Pan-African bank that's invested in your story because your story matters. It's 6 minutes after 7 p.m. You're still tuned in to The Money Show here on 702 and Cape Talk. I actually was just having the time of my life recapping some of the big stories during the week. I, in fact, just ran out of time, and I was hoping we could still speak about some of those. One of the questions that I actually wanted to ask you in that previous hour is if you are a banker with Time Bank, right? On the back of Time Bank's massive strides since 2019. If you're a banker or at least one of the customers for Time Bank, tell me what it is that you enjoy about digital banking. If not, speak to me about whether it's something that you would consider over time. But I'm going to switch now to speaking about nurturing growth and championing possibly the agricultural business in South Africa. I mentioned earlier how important of a sector it is when it comes to the South African economy. Joining me now on the line is Quinty Rabopala, who is going to be speaking to us about her farming journey since 2018. What inspired her, where she is now, and what she hopes that the agricultural sector will still be able to achieve in South Africa, and of course her contribution to the sector. Quinty, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us this evening on The Money Show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Let me start by saying, and I mentioned in the preview in the previous hour, that you are in fact an award-winning farmer. What does that mean?
That means that we were enrolled in an incubation program for Black Umbrella, and there were training that we attended, and then there was also technical training that we had to go through. And amongst all the women entrepreneurs that were on the program, we came tops.
All right, and what set you apart rather from the rest of the businesses?
I think our determination and also the way I explained my vision when I entered the program and how we ended up achieving everything that we envisaged coming into the program. So we started our farming journey 2018, but intensively into business 2020. We had a lot of challenges, including, access to markets, as any entrepreneur in the agricultural space goes through, especially when you are starting. And then there were issues of compliance, there were issues of finances, and all that. So
when you started, Quinty, apologies, but when you started in 2018, what was that vision that you presented? What was the vision?
The vision was to get into farming and then farm niche crops that will enable us to be profitable and sustainable. So that was the dream. So when I started, I didn't go into, your traditional vegetable, but also we had an issue with the land. We are in Gauteng, land is very expensive. So if you go into farming, you need to go in with a plan that will set you aside, So we opted for niche products. So we produce the likes of baby marrows, green beans, sugar snaps. So these are high value crops. When I say high value, it means they are expensive in the market. So we opted for high value crops, and then we also had a vision to also process, because as you would see, it's typical black small scale farmer will produce a cabbage 7 rand at the shop, 100 cabbage, that is 700 rand. So how much are you making there? But with my baby marrows, I sell per kg, and at some point we were selling the baby marrows 45 rand per kg. So I went in with the vision to be sustainable and profitable.
Quinty, when you started out on, I think it was a 1.5 hectare plot of land in Midrand, but you've now branched out and you've scaled up your business into Limpopo, if I'm not mistaken. How did you manage to do that? You mentioned that there were a number of hurdles that you came across, market access as well as compliance. How did you get over those?
So on top of market access and compliance, there's the issue of capacity as well, because you approach a market and then they tell you, okay, we can give you a market, but we want 2 tons per week. How do I get to 2 tons on a 1.5 hectare farm? So that for me was a wake-up call to say you need to expand. So in Limpopo, land is cheap there. The tribal authorities, they've got land lying fallow. So I identified a property that was lying fallow. I went to the tribal authority. I asked for permission to lease. And luckily for me, they didn't have any problem. They gave me the property. We actually planted 5 hectares of butternuts at this point. And they'll be ready in January.
Interesting.
So,
Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to emphasize the issue of capacity, that it's very difficult to approach, sustainable markets if you don't have capacity. So for me, this property in Limpopo, it just opened a whole lot of opportunities for me. And then I used the Midrand farm as a base. So if you want to come and see what I'm producing, I'll take you to my Midrand farm where the magic happens.
What are some of the contributions that some of the corporates have been able to give you in terms of support, with the capital, with the skills development as part of that journey of yours to get to where you are now? And how, I think, over time, has it been any easier in terms of market access with some of the programs that you've done? I think you were in 2020, was last year if I'm not mistaken, you were part of this Yakula program through Black Umbrellas. Having gotten all of those skills and some of the lessons that you learned through that, was it beneficial to your business at least?
It was very beneficial. If I can just take you back a bit. So what happens in the industry? Nobody will come to you unless you've got something. You need to first have something and then show people that, okay, this is what I've achieved so far and this is the assistance that I needed. So when I got to the Siakula program through Black Umbrella, I had already went through a journey. I already knew what I wanted. I already knew that I needed to work on my compliance. I needed guidance on that, on how to go about doing that. I know I needed finance. I needed to get my administration in order so that I'm finance ready. And luckily for me, after this program, I got Global Gap. So Global Gap is a standard in the agricultural industry. Yes. So it means now at this point, we can actually export our product.
Is it already ready for export?
We just need to, get through documents. But we were audited on Friday, and we should get our certificate in January. And then in addition to that, I got Agri-BE Fund, which is a fund administered by Land Bank from the Department of Agriculture. We actually secured 4.5 million to build ourselves a proper pack house and then also get trucks, because also as part of compliance, you must not break the value chain. You can't be transporting vegetables in open bakkie, which is what we've been doing. Yes, so these programs, they really assisted us in, picking our stuff together so that we are compliance ready. We are also funding ready.
You mentioned that you were into niche vegetables, your baby marrows, your broccolis. I think you said your sugar snap peas as well. And now being somewhat or close to being ready for, branching into the export market, what are some of the markets that are available outside of South Africa, your export markets for these particular products?
The market is there. UK consumes a lot of baby marrows from South Africa. I think there's Dubai as well. Now Botswana is opening up a vegetable export for South Africa. So I think the opportunities are going to be endless from here, especially with us getting a tech house that is compliant and also having those logistical issues sorted. So I think for us, really, the sky is the limit. I think for me, I've reached where I was going. Yeah. Now it's just a matter of just watching the show.
How do you, if there's somebody who's listening tonight who wants to do exactly what you're doing, who has the idea but doesn't have the access to capital, doesn't have the skills, doesn't know where to go, tell me about, give somebody advice about what it is, where they need to go, what it is they need to do, some of the lessons that you learned that you think would be beneficial for somebody else in your position who wants to do exactly what you're doing, who eventually getting out into the export markets, which is quite huge.
Yeah, I think the the best thing to do is just to align yourself with people who has already made it. I know it's difficult. These people, they are already, busy as easy. But I think the first thing is just to align yourself so that you can learn, because there are so many unknowns into the agricultural business. Most of the things, you learn them on the ground. But I think if you've got a mentor, somebody who has walked the journey, at least you will be 5% in. You will go in, having a little information. But I also think that a business, it needs somebody who's got passion. You need to know what you are looking for. And then you need to sacrifice. Because often people would say, I want to start a business. Okay, so what sacrifices do you want to make? No, but I need to keep my day job. You can't do that. You just need to put yourself in, and then the rest will follow. But I think commitment is the most important thing. Get a mentor, align yourself, read, also attend seminars, Facebook, social media, like all this information is there. Just align yourself with the industry. Listen to news as well, because now we are on the radio.
Yeah.
Just keep yourself informed. But most importantly, get yourself as somebody who's already there. Do farm visits, see, copy, see what people are doing.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's Quinty Rabopala, who is the founder of Kinokata Farms, speaking to us about what it is that you might be able to do if you are in a position like her, having started out in 2018 to where she is now. If it's something that you're interested in, perhaps, again, like she just said now, get in touch with the people who are in those particular markets dealing with the very same thing so that they are able to share the knowledge that they have.
702 and Cape Talk.
Lives online on primemediaplus.com.
Small Business Focus is brought to you by Capitec. No matter the size of your business, Capitec's got you. We are almost 19 minutes after 7 p.m. This is The Money Show. My name is Nogukanya Mdambo. It's the end of the year and we're starting to wind down, at least. Businesses also doing the same. So if you're a small business owner, this would be the time for you to start reflecting on what you've been able to achieve throughout the course of the year and what it is that you think you'll be able to achieve next year. But this time of the year can also be particularly stressful for small business owners because of the high consumer demand, the tight deadlines, the personal responsibilities, of course, depending on what business you're in. So what I've decided to do this evening is speak to Bulelani Balabala, who's a business speaker, just to take us through what he thinks you would be able to do, what you need to do to get the stress under control so that you're able to still deliver. Bulelani, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Good evening. Okay, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
No, man, I'm good actually. Looking forward to the break.
Yeah, of course, we all are. Bulelani, this time of the year, like I mentioned, can be stressful to some small businesses. Tell me about some of the battles or the challenges that they're faced with at this time of the year.
Thank you so much, and good evening to the listeners. I think, one of the biggest challenges, I think, for majority of small business owners is a sense of anxiousness and anxiety. I think also when you sort of, look at the year and maybe your financial performance has not been the best. This season presents itself, I think, to many of us as a direct season for family and friends. But I guess, if you're unable to, pay your bills, purely because, you only literally have a week or 2 weeks to operate, unless you're operating a retail-based business that is going to spring up in sales within this season and time. So I think, it's met with a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, but also, equally just a lot of frustration in and around, confusion in and around how does a small business or how will they then plan for the next year? Yeah. And I think that then in itself, drives up burnout and then also then equally fatigue, where an individual or an entrepreneur steps into the new year but still feeling frustrated and overwhelmed by the challenges of the previous year.
Once you've identified those warning signs, I think you probably call them, Bulelani, how then do you remedy it? As a business owner, do you have the room to say no to some of the contracts maybe at a busy time such as this? If not, how do you then work around that?
Yeah, no, so thank you so much for that question. So maybe just one step back, I think for me, and I think to any business owner, any individual who's out there, I think some of the very basic signs and to identify them is, I mean, you've got fatigue, number one. Number two, some of the things that you used to have a big passion in doing, that passion has sort of fallen off. The second one is irritability and difficulty to concentrate and focus on the work that you know you're supposed to be delivering on. And then I think to answer your question, right, I mean, there's this phrase that we keep hurling around that says, don't leave any money on the table. What I always say to small business owners and to draw it closer and make it more filtered out is to say, don't leave any money that's meant for you.
Yeah.
And equally so, going back to this season, right, it's important for us as small businesses to unpack a number of things. And I think the first one is to say, yes, we understand that you might be cash strapped, and taking that order means that you are able to fulfill that demand, or rather those expenses, right, and lessen the pressure. But also equally at the end of the day, if you've been able to do that, don't go into the cobweb of now starting out a new, what we now call financial stream, and you end up paddling your focus across the board, and you now never ever niche out or even specialize in any actual discipline, and you will do anything for money.
Yeah.
Because what they will end up doing at the end of the day, it's going to render you, it's going to debunk your brand and render you useless to some of your customers, because you would not have been able to arch out what your clear focus is at the end of the day.
Yeah. Bulelani, some of the warning signs that you mentioned, your fatigue, your irritability, the difficulty concentrating, losing your passion for your business, are not things that develop overnight, right? These are things you would start to see over time throughout the year. So obviously, now at the end of the year is not the only time that you need to start taking note of these. What are some of the practical self-care tips throughout the year so that you're not getting at the end of the year and then you're suddenly overwhelmed?
So I think number one, right, in building practical, self-help tips, it's important, I can't emphasize enough, build in a routine. It's important for you to build in a routine, especially because entrepreneurship in itself is high-pressured, high-stress, and requires really a lot from you. So building a routine, is going to work for you. And I think part of building a routine is to understand when am I best, when do I get the best of me, right? To be able to either relax myself out or to energize myself in the day. I mean, I'll make an example. With me, my day I start my day extremely early in the morning. I mean, 4 a.m., some seasons, 5 a.m. And I do a number of things. There are 4 main things, right, that have helped me to sort of reduce the stress, reduce the anxiety and plan for my day, right, and navigate throughout the year. I take a moment to plan. They take about 30 minutes to plan for the day. I take another 30 minutes to go through my emails.
Yeah.
I then take another hour to take a walk while listening to a podcast. And how I then map out the podcast is I then map out what is any new skill or new information I'd like to learn. And so I listen to podcasts about that. Or what is the personal development skill I'd like to learn in, whether leadership or so, then I listen to that. And then also equally so, I then find spaces where I'm able to build communities with the right type of like-minded individuals, where we might not necessarily talk about our business challenges, but we just talk about things that are abstract. And I found that that little distraction puts you in a space where you actually realize that your problems might not be as big as you actually think that they are, because there are people that are going through deeper problems, but they're finding ways to navigate.
Yeah. Bulelani, one of the things that small businesses will often tell you, other businesses as well, medium size as well, will often tell you that they don't have access to resources. And that's something that they battle with constantly, right? But I think I'm curious to know from you if there are alternatives in instances like this where you do have a business owner who's struggling under the weight of the demands and keeping up with, the end year fatigue, irritability, and so on. What other support structures are there when small business owners want to ask for help? Is it possible to ask for help from family and friends? Would they be able to be sympathetic to some of the plights of the small business owners?
No, definitely. I think, from a support perspective, it goes back to saying growth in a business can be the worst thing, but equally so when you don't grow, It could also equally be frustrating.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes how we plan for that pressure in high seasons, right, or rather peak seasons, is number one, being able to find other individuals who are in the same industry as in you, who are within the same industry and you, who can take up some of your capacity, or rather offer up some of your capacity to you and deliver to your clients. That then loosens the pressure. I mean, you might not necessarily make the margins that you're looking to make, if you had actually produced the items internally. But what it does is that it then presents yourself as someone who can be reliable and deliver to your customers, but loosens the pressure while you can sometimes even deal with your own stress, anxiety, and emotional pressure.
Yeah.
But equally so, it's important for us to then lean in on families and friends, but equally, the most important thing that I want to then emphasize in and around this is, someone will say, but, my friends are far, my closest friends are far, my family, we don't have the best relationship. Build a community of individuals, right? I used to think in my early days of entrepreneurship that my community of entrepreneurs is everyone who was within the printing space. But then I realized that, there's a unique and amazing things that happens when you're able to build communities with individuals that have got the similar mindset or rather focus, but might not even be in the same industry as you. Because what ends up happening is that the problems that you bring to the fore, they will then ask you shift questions that would seem ordinary or normal to you. But in them asking you those shift questions, it puts you in a position where you're actually able to even unravel within that moment in time and understand that, I'm just overwhelmed, but in actual fact, I had the answers internally all along.
Bulelani, tell me, what was the Township Entrepreneur Alliance able to do with some of these small business owners? Are they able to get in touch with you? Do you have, any role to play when it comes to building some of these communities that you think are so important for small businesses?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think the work that we've done through Township Entrepreneurs Alliance over the past, 9 years now, going on 10 in March 2025, been able to directly impact over 80,000 township entrepreneurs. And then what we've done is, because primarily some of our work is really in various communities and we don't have a solid footprint, we've created digital communities where the local entrepreneurs, whether it's Hayando or Mdantsani, can then communicate with each other. And I think one of the best ways, if you're a small business that is based in the township, or any small business really whatsoever that really wants to connect over this season digitally with like-minded individuals, just send us a WhatsApp. Our WhatsApp channel is 068, let me say that slower, 068 158 9484. Just drop a WhatsApp and Jackie, who then mends that WhatsApp community, will be able to redirect it to the right place.
Yeah. That's Bulelani Balabala, who is a business speaker as well as the founder of Township Entrepreneur Alliance, speaking to some of the challenges that small businesses face, particularly at this time of the year, under the weight of higher demands, I guess, and a faster paced, timetable and a calendar. If you are able to get in touch with him, if you need help and you need a community, please do so. That WhatsApp number, he said, is 068 158 9484.
The Money Show.
Investment School.
A very good evening to you. 24 minutes to 8 p.m. My name is Nogokanya Mdambo. You tuned into The Money Show. It's that time of the year where we again, and I've been saying this, where we start writing up our plans and goals for the next year. And among those are always the financial goals. We all want to save more in the next year. I don't know what we were doing the rest of the year, but of course next year we want to save more. We want to look for more jobs. We want our money to work for us. We've got all these massive plans that we start putting out into the ether. We draw up budgets. January, we've got these fancy looking budgets. February, you probably like me, start to fall out of that budget and you start spending a little recklessly. So I've got Gary Boysen here, who's a director at Rand Swiss, and he's going to be speaking to me about, actually to you as well, about how we can make our money grow through investment. Right, Gary? Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's start from the very basics of investment, right? Speak to me about why investing is important, what we mean by investing.
Well, investing, I mean, essentially make your money work for you in a passive sense, so that you don't have to look for other jobs or that. You can let your money do the hard work while you are, I suppose, pursuing whatever you like to do. So I mean, investment, it's absolutely crucial in South Africa. I think the stats are that only around 6% of South Africans at retirement are able to fund themselves, and they become a burden to their families. And really, life gets very difficult. So the sooner you start investing, the better, because of course you have that wonderful thing called compound interest. It's essentially making your money work for you harder.
So we've got different ways of investing, right? Speak to me about those. What are the different options that are available to us when it comes to investments?
That is a huge topic. So I suppose you can probably start with the asset classes is the easiest way of thinking about it. So, and I suppose almost at a product level as well. So, typically all investments are broken into, call it 4, maybe 5 asset classes, depending who you speak to. So the first asset class is probably the most risky asset class traditionally, and that would be equities. So you're buying shares in a company.
Yes.
You get, as an investor, to claim a portion of their earnings, which is wonderful. And that's either paid out to you through dividends, or through, they can also return capital to you through something called share buybacks. So that's equity, higher risk. Then you get the bond market as well. So you can go and invest in bonds. Here, instead of taking an ownership stake in a company, you're essentially lending a company money, and they're going to pay you a coupon or an interest rate based on the money that you've lent them. You lend them $100, they're going to give you, in South Africa, depending on how risky the company is, probably like 8-9%. More risky companies obviously going to give you a little bit more, because you need to ask for more money, because your money's at higher risk.
Sure.
So that's the bond market. And then property is weird, because property is also actually lumped in with alternative, actually, but a lot of people strip it out and call property investing as another type of investing. Now you can go and do that by purchasing a rental property directly. It's generally not a great idea, because in South Africa, all of the laws are skewed against landlords. But there's all other ways that you can invest through different instruments, things like property REITs, which are real estate investment trusts. And there you go and buy a property REIT. It's professionally managed. You can get office and retail and industrial exposure rather than just a residential property. And you generally get pretty good yields out of that as well. So that's property. And then of course you've got cash and alternatives as the other segments. Alternatives kind of covers, it's kind of the cheat, because it covers everything else. It covers everything from hedge funds to baseball cards to fine wines to gold coins to whatever you want. And that's your alternative segment. So that's probably the different, those are the different broad categories of investments that you can access. And each one is suitable probably for a different risk profile, or having a blended approach across all of them.
When we speak about diversifying your portfolio, right, do you mean by including all of these? So having in your portfolio, having your equities, having access to your bond markets, investing in your real estate, your REITs. When we say diversify your portfolio, is that what you mean?
I suppose diversifying a portfolio. The finance sector is full of jargon. So diversify is often just seen as a blanket benefit. When people hear it, they think, "Oh, that's good, I'm diversified." So I actually say, diversify to protect, concentrate to create. If you've got a great investment, you want to put a lot of money towards it, and generally it can do really well. But diversification can take all forms. So a key diversification is across those asset classes. To a little bit of equities, a little bit of bonds. It's so important, in fact, that in the retirement space, they have Regulation 28, which forces you to invest only a certain portion in equity and kind of limits the way and encourages investors in the retirement space to split across the asset classes. But diversification can also take form even in your share portfolio. You can buy a bank, and you can buy a retailer, and you can buy a commodity company, and even that will give you some form of diversification as well. But I think the key to diversifying correctly and well is to pick up non-correlated assets. And what do I mean by that? It means that you want to pick up things that behave differently in different situations. So there's no point in picking up Anglo and Billiton and thinking, or Anglo and BHP to diversify commodity miners and think, oh, I've done a good job diversifying.
No.
You want to do something that is non-correlated, that behaves in a totally different way, and that gives you a better sense of diversification.
All right. If you want to ask Gary any questions when it comes to investment, please feel free to do so. The number to dial is 011-883-0702. If you want to send us a WhatsApp or a voice note, a text or a voice note, you're also welcome to do that. The number is 072-702-1702. Ask him just about anything about investment tonight. He's in the hot seat for a reason. You're more than welcome to do that. Now, Gary, all of this, like you said, there's a lot of jargon in the financial world. If I am a rookie coming into it for the first time, how do I then decide if I want to go into equities, bonds, or if I want to go into REITs? Because it all sounds like a lot, right? And I don't know whether these things are correlated or not. I don't understand the stocks, for example. So if you're a rookie, how do you come into it?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's plenty of ways to get involved in investment. And really, it's almost like thinking about it in the medical context.
Yeah.
Doctors study a long time for a reason as well.
Yes.
You don't just go, I want to get into heart surgery.
I hope not.
So working with a financial professional is always recommended, especially if you're a total novice. The last thing that you want to do is go and kind of stick your retirement funds and all your hard-earned money into something that you have no idea what it does, and then it turns out to be an absolute scam. So working with a seasoned professional, I think, is always going to be good advice. Trying to find a very good professional is always the tricky thing, but it's absolutely key. But at the same time, there are certain instruments that are probably more suited for retail investors that take some of that the complexity and the burden of going and selecting stocks or trying to find out which bond is going to be appropriate for you. And that's like, you could probably look at something in the ETF space, so the exchange traded funds. And the reason for that is, as we said, diversify to protect, concentrate to create.
Yes.
A lot of the ETFs are very, very well diversified. And what you're doing is essentially just buying the market. So you look at it and say, I know I'm younger, because generally younger people want equities. I want some equity exposure. And you go and buy a basket of S&P 500 stocks. So you get 500 different companies rather than hassling with buying a single company. At the same time, in the local market, plenty of ETFs, top 40, top 50, that you can access as well. And generally, the other thing that you've got to be cognizant of is cost as well. You want to try and do it at fairly low cost. And a lot of the ETFs are a lot cheaper than going into the typical mutual funds or unit trusts. And they give a very similar, you're buying the market. They give you a similar kind of return over time.
How do I assess what's a good investment and what's a bad investment, right? If I don't have a financial advisor and I'm winging it, I really am going in blind. Once I've started to invest, and I've heard maybe from a friend or two that they've got shares here and there, and this is where they are, and I decide to follow that. How then do I keep track of what's happening with where I've invested and make a determination? And at what point also do I make that determination about whether this is a good investment or a bad investment?
It's a good question. So, obviously that all comes down to the reporting of the platform that you're using as well. So, too many people, I think, specifically in the retirement space, once you get into running your own stock portfolio or kind of the more traditional investments, it becomes quite easy because the reporting on systems these days is absolutely excellent. It's not just this like old paper statement that comes to you. You can log in on an app on your phone and you can track almost on a daily basis exactly, am I up, am I down? It'll give you a little chart of how you're performing, so you can monitor it, and you have to monitor it. You can't really just put it away and forget. Like you do need to know where your funds are and where you've allocated them, but at the same time, it's almost it's incredible that the larger portions of clients' money. So typically when you look at like a stock portfolio, for example, that's the discretionary money. That's your after-tax money that you've kind of allocated to some investments, and everyone watches that like a hawk because I bought some MTN shares, or I bought some Nvidia shares, or whatever you did.
Yeah.
And you're kind of very engaged with that. And then they completely forget about their retirement segment of their portfolio. And they go, oh, well, the company put it in there and I'm sure it's being managed and I don't even know where it is.
Yeah.
And I guess it's fine. That's absolutely terrible because you so often see someone that's focusing on maybe 10% of their overall net wealth. And they're spending 90% of their time focusing on that when there's 90% of their money that is essentially idle or attracting high fees, underperforming what it should be doing. And it really is to understand where's all the money, how does it all fit together, and kind of build that kind of top-down X-ray of you as a person, as a financial advisor. A financial advisor will sit with you and they'll do a full risk profile on you. They'll do a needs analysis. They'll look at like the objective that you have personally, and they'll kind of take you through it and say, listen, this is how old you are, this is what you're aiming for, this is a good return, this is a bad return. So they're going to help you with that. But typically, if you look at like where the return spectrum is, on aggregate, if you're looking at the local market in Rand, you should probably expect about 15% a year. That's kind of almost the historical average. I mean, obviously you can have years where the market's down 20%, years when the market's, we've got the NASDAQ and the S&P up almost 30% in dollars this year. Their long run average is between about 9 and 10%, depending when you take your starting point. So that's the equity market. That's the high risk stuff. And then it kind of goes all the way down to the risk-free rate, which is essentially cash, in simple terms, cash in your bank account. What can I get if I put this money in a deposit in a bank? What will the bank pay me for no fluctuation on your money, to take no risk? That's kind of the lower bound of what your return should be. Now, if you're a rookie and you've never invested before, it's so tempting to listen to these guys that are, but I'm going to give you 7% a month. Compound what 7% a month is. Not the best hedge fund managers in the world can't do that. And probably the best thing to think about when you're exploring this is that's the range of reasonable returns. And you can get better than that. I mean, you can aim for 20% a year, for example, in Rand terms. But when someone starts promising something that's too good to be true,
it probably is too good to be true. Quite right. What are some of the factors that influence our investments, right? Whether micro or macro, politics, everything is connected to everything, right? So when we're listening to the news and suddenly there's geopolitical tension somewhere, or I don't know, we had the US Fed announcing the rate decision yesterday, and suddenly everything changed in the markets and everybody was suddenly more nervous than they were the day before, and what are some of those factors that we need to be conscious of when we're making investments, so we know, I suppose, where to go, what to do, and just to be conscious investors, I guess.
No, absolutely. And I think there's a level where investors become overly focused on news flow as well.
Yeah.
And suddenly that prompts decision making that is not necessarily in their best interest. So the old adage is, if it's in the press, it's in the price already. So often people see this news article come out and go, oh, well, now I better do this.
Yeah.
Generally, that's probably too late.
Yeah.
I mean, if you believe, it's the efficient market hypothesis, essentially, if it's out there in the public domain, it's already factored into the price of your. It's already priced into your investment. So there's a strong argument to be made that if you've invested in something for a reason and you have a fundamental thesis to say, I've invested in these equities or these shares, or I've decided to leave my money in a bank deposit for whatever the reason is, because I need a low risk investment, so I've put this in a bank deposit. And because I'm planning on buying a car in 6 months' time, listening to what happens in the Fed announcement and, interest rates came down by a quarter of a basis point, a quarter of a percent at least, 25 basis points, that's not the right thing to do. You need to focus on what is your objective in the investment first. And I think focusing on what your objectives are and picking the appropriate investments based on your objective is far more important than listening to those kind of knee-jerk reaction news flow style announcements.
Right. So a lot of these questions have been based on somebody who's new to investments, right? If you're someone who already has investments, you're more familiar with it, maybe you have a financial advisor, you understand what's going on. When do we reassess? How do we reassess? How, if you're already in there, when's a good time to reassess whether things are working out for you or not, and what you then should do?
It's a great question. So I suppose like you reassess and change investments. Typically we run portfolios, so we're assessing it at almost every minute of the day. We were all watching the Fed announcement last night after hours, because you're almost constantly engaged in the market if you're working as a portfolio manager, for example. So the assessment is almost constant in that case. Not everyone has the ability to do that. They don't have the luxury of doing something like that. But quite often, if you look at like when do people shift their strategies, when do you buy and sell? So I mean, typically, in the portfolios that we run, we have different methodologies depending again on the objective. So in one of our portfolios, so the global equity portfolio that I run, typically we have hard and fast rules around reweighting, but then we'll also reassess based on the fundamentals of the underlying company as well. So we would make a decision to drop a stock out of the portfolio when we've analyzed it and we come to a point where we say this is no longer going to achieve the return objective that we want. We need to replace it. We've got something better to put in, and then we'll switch that position out. At the same time, there are hard and fast rules. So in the global equity portfolio, for example, we limit ourselves to 10% exposure in a single stock.
Okay.
And it's so that we don't build up that concentration risk that, if something material was to happen on the stock outside of our control, we don't want that level of exposure. We don't want to take a 5% knock because it's a slightly more conservative portfolio. So we have these, and there's all sorts of that. That's a mandate imposed limit. But I mentioned Regulation 28 earlier.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're also forced to reweight because of regulation. If you've got a 75% equity exposure and your equities naturally grow faster than your bonds,
Sure.
suddenly that goes up to 80%. You're in breach of the limits. By regulation, we have to rebalance that.
Yeah.
So we have to bring it down. That's a forced rebalancing. On our AI portfolio, which is a more speculative portfolio we launched a year and a half ago, we deliberately decided we are not going to put any. This is for discretionary money. It's designed to take higher risk. AI is quite a high risk theme.
Yeah.
So we said we are not ever going to rebalance just because a stock has become more concentrated in a portfolio. We're going to try and run the winners, because so often what happens with companies, I always hear investors say, what goes up must come down.
Yeah.
Stock markets don't work like gravity.
Okay.
It just doesn't work like gravity. Good companies tend to do better, and bad companies tend to go out of business.
Okay.
So we decided we want to keep this weighting as high as, well, not as high as possible, but if there's a winner, we want to hold on to that as tight as we can. So we decided, like I said, we launched this about a year and a half ago, and I think we're up 50% in US dollars, from inception in about a year and a half. I think, so it's been a spectacular gainer. But what's happened inside the portfolio is Palantir, which is a security company in the US. It's kind of the Peter Thiel company. It's already grown to about 11.5% of the overall portfolio. Now, naturally, you'd say, I want to reweight that, but we are trying to take on additional risk. Our objective in that portfolio is to take on additional risk to generate this outsized return. So we're going to leave that. If that goes to 35, it's only if it goes to 35% of the portfolio that will actually shut the portfolio to new investors. We'll still maintain the exposure in Palantir, but we just won't be able to allocate new funds to that portfolio. We have to open a second class. That's the regulation that we impose on ourselves. So, it's... it depends. So, like I said, it depends on so to answer your question in a quick way, it depends on the objectives, but so often it is also mandated, or it's a regulation that is forcing you to rebalance as well.
All right. We're talking all things investment this evening. We have about 6 minutes to go to the top of the hour. My guest is Gary Boysen, who's joining me in studio. He's the director at Rand Swiss. If you have any questions to ask him about investments, what you need to do, where you need to go, please feel free to get in touch.
The Money Show.
Investment School.
4 minutes to go to 8 p.m. I'm going to take one quick question for Gary. We have one from WhatsApp from Lee, who says, good evening. I have a question. Actually, I need advice. So what I need to know is, will I be making a wise decision, Gary, this is for you, if I sold one of my houses to pay off and settle the outstanding balance on my credit cards? I have 3 properties so far, and also I wanted to use my second property to secure a 20% equity funding from the banks as collateral to meet the investors I've sourced out to fund my student housing accommodation project with 80%. The plan is to build 54 units, and the funding I've sourced is worth 50 million rand. That's a question from Lee. Gary, if you're able to wrap your head around that question and perhaps give Lee some advice on what she says.
Yeah, so it sounds like a very complex transaction that Lee is doing. So I think when it comes to financial advice, certainly, like, advice relates to the individual person. So we even with that very detailed question, we do not have enough information to give proper financial advice around this. But the fact that she's talking about credit card, selling a house to pay off credit card debt, that immediately raises some concerns. So remember, credit card debt sits at probably 26-27%. So when you're looking at any investment, you look at a leveraged investment, which is what she's making. So she's using gearing in the background.
Okay.
you always look at your weighted average cost of capital. So how much is the money that you're essentially borrowing, or the investor's giving you? What is that money costing you to use to fund your project? Now, is your project going to deliver more than that funding rate? That's kind of like the basic question in investments that you need to answer. I'm getting capital in at a price, and I'm going to invest it. Will I get more than what I'm paying for that capital in return? And like I said, credit card debt at 26.5% is very, very high funding cost. So it's very unlikely that and again, we don't know the type of property this is. Let's assume it's a residential property. It might be a warehouse. It might be student accommodation, which has much higher returns on it. But if it's a rental property, typically the yield on a rental property will be between 8 and say 15%. Okay. So the fact that you're paying, let's say, 26%. To earn 8%, you're losing money. Yeah. This is not good. So yes, I would say it does sound like the right thing to do would be to clear your credit card debt. If you're using credit card funding to fund property investment, which I don't know how high the credit card limit is that she has, but it sounds like it's the right thing to do. But as I said, a very detailed question, but even with all that detail, not enough to really give proper financial advice.
Very briefly, where should she go to get the proper financial advice then?
There's plenty of registered financial services providers out there that would definitely be able to help with the question. And I mean, a quick Google search will bring that up. But I think the most important thing when looking for a financial advisor as well is you just go on the FSCA website. They must always have in their email signature, any marketing material, any website will have their FSP number on it. You need to take that FSP number, plug it into the FSCA's website, and just check that they are a registered financial advisor. It'll tell you exactly what categories they're registered for, the types of products that they can advise on. It's going to give you a whole lot of information about them. And that's for anyone that's thinking of approaching a new financial advisor, great to check out their registration qualifications first.
That's Gary Boysen, Director at Rand Swiss, telling you what you should be doing with your money. Hopefully you're able to take that advice into the new year, make some wise decisions, find a financial advisor possibly to help you with those investments. This is The Money Show. My name is Nogokanya Mdambo. It's 8 o'clock. That's all the time we have for today. Let's do this again tomorrow. Great to be in your company this evening. Let's get the very latest in Eyewitness News.